The kitchen crew will be here in a minute. Especially if I nag them. Cole, are you the down and upper? So it needs to go, yeah, down a little bit. We're not full of people right now. Oh, who are we missing? Okay. Anyway, here we go. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 today, which is an unusual number for our date. But here we go. Today is 12, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 23. So. Today's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh, sorry, now that we're all confused. Okay. As you are, you're welcome here. Visitor, friend, or longtime member, you're welcome here. With little children, or your partner, or alone. We joyfully welcome you here. You're welcome here as believer or doubter, as joiner or loner. You're welcome here. Feeling a part of us or not, full of energy or not, seeking a vision or a rest, you're welcome to join us as you are. We acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish, Nez Perce, Blackfeet, and Anishinaabe people who shared the Helena Valley as hunting grounds. The chalice lighting. Okay, Sam, it's your turn. Let's say this all together, please. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. We haven't sung Spirit of Life for a while, and I'm learning about Unitarianism, and I got these 3 hymns for today off the top 10 list of Unitarian hymns. Okay, Spirit of Life. Okay, our reading is also a UU standard. It's on page 594 in Singing the Living Tradition. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We affirm and promote justice, equality, and compassion in human relations.
We believe that all people should be treated fairly.
We affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth.
We believe that our churches are places where all people are accepted and where we keep on learning together.
We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
We believe that each person must be free to search for what is true and right in life.
We affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process.
We believe that all people should have a voice and a vote about the things which concern them.
We affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
We believe that we should work for a peaceful, fair, and free world.
We affirm and promote respect for the interdependence web of all existence of which we are a part.
We believe that we should care for our planet Earth.
Now, joys and concerns. Anyone have something they'd like to share? Yes.
Well, I have a big, not so much concern, but sadness. This week, I was at Christmas Day dinner at Marianne and Paul's. We had a lovely time, 17 of us, and I came home in so happy a mellow mood and was informed by one of my neighbors that Bill Allison, who has been working for me for years as a carpenter and a co-creator, had died that morning of a heart attack. And that was totally out of the blue. And I feel like somebody kind of ripped off my half. And so this whole week I have been missing Bill, really missing Bill. So I'm particularly concerned for his family. He has a sister who is legally blind, and every week Bill went to her house and went grocery shopping with her and vacuumed her rug and read to her every single Sunday, took her to every appointment. And that is an incredible loss for Teresa.
We're sorry too.
Hi, I'm Pete. We had my parents visiting over Christmas. We had a nice visit. Unfortunately, on Tuesday morning, my father wasn't feeling well, and we took him into the hospital where he was diagnosed with he's having some heart problems. So he was in the hospital until yesterday afternoon, and then we got them back on the plane home to Minnesota this afternoon. They got him stabilized, and he'll be getting follow-up care back home in Minnesota. But yeah, if you guys can just keep him in your thoughts, he'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Pete. Anyone else? Okay. And I assume we are keeping Carolyn in our hearts also because of her son. Okay. Thank you for your gifts this day and for all the gifts of action that make the community possible. If you're visiting, please remain our guest. Your presence is your gift to us. Sam and Mara. And thank you, Judy, for that song. It just always makes me feel good. Now we have the message for all ages. It's about John Murray and Thomas Potter. They call this the Universalist miracle story. So we'll start out with once upon a time. There were two men, and one of them lived in New Jersey in America, only it wasn't America yet. It was over 250 years ago, so we weren't even a country yet. And this man's name was Thomas Potter. And he was a farmer, and he had a farm. Now, Thomas couldn't read or write, which was really not uncommon for those times. There were a lot of people that didn't read or write. But it was interesting. He heard a voice, and the voice told to build a meeting house. And that would be like what we call a church today. They still, in like the Quaker a religion called the church, the meeting house. A lot of people do. And so this meeting house he built because he was hoping for this preacher that was going to come and preach to him. But he had no idea whether anybody would really come. He had no idea what would really happen. But what he had, oh goody, more people, hi. Okay. Okay. Hi there. Thank you for coming. Good. So, oh good, we're gonna line up in a certain way here. Okay. So Thomas built this meeting house, and he was waiting for somebody to come. He was a Universalist, and he didn't know anybody else who was a Universalist that lived around him. And there certainly wasn't a Universalist preacher. And we're going to hear more about that when Bill talks to us. But that's one half of the story. Thomas is in New Jersey. On the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, days and days and days away by ship, maybe I should say weeks away by ship, lived a man named John Murray. And he was at first a Methodist minister, and then he decided to be a Universalist minister. And life was going along pretty ducky for him, pretty swimmingly, until his wife got sick. Well, you know, and sometimes when people have a long illness, it costs a lot. And so his family put all his money into trying to make his wife better. But guess what? She died, and their baby died. Both his wife and his child died. And he got really depressed. I mean, I would be depressed, you know, if that happened to me.
I would also be very, 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 very depressed.
Yep. He was so depressed, and he didn't have any money either, because all the money went to the illness. So what they used to do in England, if you ran out of money, they tied you up and threw you in prison because he owed money to people. And I don't know how they thought that poor man, John Murray, was going to be able to pay his debts if he's in prison, but that's what they did. So he lived in prison for a while, and he got even more depressed until one of his relatives came along and bailed him out and got him out of jail. By now, he was really, really sad, so he gave up being a minister. He said, that's it. God's not been on my side, and I'm no longer going to be a minister. And he got on a boat, and he came towards America. And his plan was to land in America. But this guy had the worst luck. I mean, it's really hard to think about all the bad luck he had. Because instead of landing in America, he shipwrecked. He shipwrecked on a sandbar. And this was off the coast of New Jersey. So the people got off the ship. I don't know if they all lived or not, but he got off the ship. And he didn't have any money and didn't have any food. So he went looking for food. Guess whose house, whose door he knocked on? Yeah.
The other minister.
Exactly. The other guy was Thomas Potter, and he wasn't really a minister, but he was looking for a minister. He built this meeting house for a Universalist minister, and who knocks on his door?
A Universalist minister?
From across the ocean, from weeks and weeks away. I mean, from like forever away. Knock, knock, knock. Here comes the Universalist minister. And the Universalist minister opens the door. I mean, Thomas Potter opens the door and says, "Oh, I've been waiting for you. Here you are at last." And John Murray just looks at him like he's crazy. "What? You know, how did you know I was coming?" "Well, I built this meeting house. You know, it's like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they'll come." So he built the meeting house, and what, lo and behold, knock, 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 here he comes, John Murray. And Thomas Potter says, "You're the Universalist minister I've been waiting for." And John Murray says, "No way. I used to do that. I don't do that anymore. Things haven't been going well for me. I am no longer a minister." Thomas Potter said, "Yes, you are." And what did John say?
No, I'm not.
And what did Thomas say?
Yes, you are.
Right. And so they had this little thing going back and forth until finally, when I read about it, made it sound like Thomas said, "Well, you don't get your fish until you give the sermon." But anyway, they finally agreed that just this once, John Murray would give a Universalist sermon in the meeting house. And he did. And he was ready to get back on the boat to England. And lo and behold, the boat had to go up the coast of America for miles. Of course, it wasn't America. Up the coast for miles. As it turns out, John Murray gave sermons all the way up and down the coast. And indeed, he became a Universalist minister again. Thanks for listening.
You're welcome for listening.
Yeah,
He said thank you.
you're welcome. Please stand for "This Is My Song." It's Finlandia in a Singing the Living Tradition, page 159. Now Bill Kronholm is going to talk about the other you.
I have to preface this with this message was researched and written by my wife Joyce, and it was first delivered here 10 years ago. Oops, closer. Okay. But Joyce is sort of retired from public speaking, so I'm reading her message today. A century ago, a prominent agnostic, Robert Ingersoll, wrote, "The Unitarian Church has done more than any other church, and maybe more than all other churches, to substitute character for creed. I want to thank the Unitarian Church for what it's done. I want to thank the Universalist Church as well. They at least believe in a God who is a gentleman, a heavenly Father who will leave the latch string out until the last child gets home." So now I'm going to take you on a brief jog through the history of universal salvation. Universalism has its American roots in the late 18th century. The dominant theology at that time was Protestant Calvinism, and the dominant theme of the preachers at the time was hellfire and damnation. Calvinism taught that even before birth, the majority of us were destined to hell. Only a few would go to heaven, and who was going where had already been decided. Nothing could change it. Universalism replaced that vengeful God of vengeance with a merciful God of love. The underlying theological assumption that has driven Universalism is this: God's power and goodness will salvage all souls. God is too good, too loving to create any creature and then condemn them to eternal damnation. For quite some time, Joyce had been thinking of giving a service about Universalism. She got an added push from a brief conversation with a gentleman we met casually. Out of the blue, he surprised us by asking if we were Christians. We said, "Well, we're Unitarians." After a few minutes' thought, he responded, "I guess that's all right." And our conversation went on to something else. But it struck Joyce that we'd shortchanged Universalism. We have been Unitarian Universalists since our two denominations joined in 1961. But so much of what we hold dear about UU comes not from our Unitarian ancestors, but from our Universalist heritage. Yet they keep getting the short end of the stick when we talk about our history and our faith. In terms of history, consider this. By the late 1800s, there were approximately 800,000 Universalists in America. We would be thrilled to have numbers like that today instead of the paltry 180,000 members that belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association. So who are these Universalists and what happened to them? One of the first Universalists, and by that I mean someone whose theology was Universalist rather than belonging to a formal religious movement, was one of the early fathers of the Christian Church, known as Origen of Alexandria. He was born around 180 Common Era. He declared universal salvation from a loving God. As you can imagine, Origen was not popular with those in the early Christian Church, who were pushing the need to accept Jesus as Lord and Savior, the only route to salvation. He was condemned as a heretic, imprisoned, and tortured. Universal salvation floated around the Christian community for centuries, mostly underground and repressed. We have to move forward to the 18th century before we find Universalism again expressed. Enter the picture are George Debenville and John Murray. George Debenville was born in England of French Huguenot parents who had fled France to escape religious persecution. As a child, he was tortured by visions of burning in hell. But one day he had a dream. He became convinced that human beings were not sin-filled. Eventually, he made his way to America, where he presented a mystical, visionary brand of Universalism. Murray, you just heard about in the children's story, but from those beginnings, he became the foremost preacher of Universalism in America and minister of the first official Universalist church. The message of hope and eternal salvation was spreading by then. By their 1790 convention, there were 17 churches. 2 years later, there were 40. The Universalist heresy didn't escape the wrath of Calvinist clergy. One delighted his congregation by referring to the Universalist Church as the fire insurance company, because all its members were assured a place in hell. At the 1794 convention, a young minister was ordained who would become the greatest theologian of Universalism. His name was Hosea Ballou, and like all Universalist ministers of the day, he had no formal theological training. Unlike the Unitarians, who trained their ministers in schools of divinity, Universalists believed their ministers should be called and inspired by the Holy Spirit. I think Hosea Ballou must have had a sense of humor. On one occasion, when riding with a circuit in New Hampshire with a Baptist preacher, the Baptist looked over and said to him, "Brother Ballou, if I were a Universalist and feared not the fires of hell, I could hit you over the head, steal your horse and saddle, and ride away and go to heaven." Hosea Ballou replied, "If you were a Universalist, the idea would never occur to you." On another occasion, he was asked, "What would you do with a man who died reeking in sin and crime?" His answer, "I think it would be a good idea to bury him." People were drawn to the Universalist message of salvation. Their preachers carried their message of love and hope far and wide. By the late 19th century, Universalists were the 5th largest denomination in America. Universalists were strongly committed to missionary work, women's suffrage, separation of church and state, and social justice issues. They were the first religious group to go on record against slavery in 1790, much earlier than the Unitarians, whose prosperous members often benefited from the slave trade. The first African American to be ordained by the Universalists was Joseph Jordan in their 1889 convention. The Unitarians didn't ordain African Americans until well over a half century later. Joseph Jordan became a missionary in Norfolk, Virginia, and started a mission church, prep school, daycare center, serving until his death. In 1863, the Universalists were the first mainstream religion to ordain women. By this time, most Universalist ministers went to college, though it was never a requirement. But Olympia Brown did not have an easy time of it entering the St. Lawrence Theological Seminary School, and an even harder time finding a pulpit that would call a woman preacher. Still, by 1920, there were 88 Universalist women ministers, the most of any denomination. Other Universalists became famous, and the UUs of today tend to embrace them as our own while actually glossing over which of our U's they came from. Cora Barton was the founder of the American Red Cross. Dr. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, founded the first hospital for the mentally ill, opposed capital punishment, and advocated for a federal Department of Peace. Horace Greeley was the editor of the New York Tribune and considered the greatest editor of his day. They were all Universalists. Ironically, the greatest challenge for the Universalists came from their own success. As their message of a loving God grew, other denominations, in particular the Methodists, toned down all the talk of an angry God of hell and damnation. Without that horrifying message, people had less of a reason to change denominations. In fact, Joseph Jordan's church in Norfolk left the Universalist fold because the minister who succeeded him converted to Methodism and took the church with him. The Methodists were also organized differently from Universalists. When a minister died or moved on, excuse me, I need new glasses, or moved on, they would support another minister. They would appoint another minister. With the Congregationalist polity of the Universalist, they had no such recourse. Either someone would step up or the church would fade away. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the social gospel involvement of Protestant Christianity was at its peak. The movement applied Christian ethics to social problems, including inequality, alcoholism, crime, racial tensions, slums, child labor, labor unions, poor schools, and the danger of war. This movement also propelled Universalists to think in broader terms. But for the rural churches they had founded, this liberal mindset, with its focus on largely urban issues, did not hold much appeal, and the rural base of Universalism began to collapse. They were slow to urbanize in a society that was becoming increasingly urban. Unfortunately, Universalism was much better at starting churches than maintaining them over the long haul. After their 1943 General Assembly, no longer called a convention, Robert Cummins, the general superintendent, articulated this version for the future. Universalism cannot be limited to Protestantism or Christianity, not with denying its very name. Ours is a world fellowship, not just Christian. For as long as Universalism is Universalism and not partialism, the fellowship bearing its name must succeed in making it unmistakably clear that all were welcome, theist and humanist, Unitarian and Trinitarian, colored and colorless. A circumscribed universalism is unthinkable. Their membership shrinking, Universalists cast about for a suitable partner that would allow them to continue. The theological divide over the issue of salvation was too great to consider the Congregationalist, but they finally accepted an offer by the Unitarians to consider a merger. Throughout that process, however, the fear that the larger, richer Unitarians would subsume the Universalist and their identity would be lost. We confirm their fears when we use only the term Unitarian to describe our faith. This is a very short version of Universalism. The legacy they gave us was a rich one and an important one. It demands that we take to our heart the ideas that every person is worthy of our respect and consideration. It demands that we speak up in the face of oppression and strive to change the world for the better. It challenges us to be open ourselves, not just to people like us, but to all people. The Universalists succeeded in changing the moral and spiritual landscape in America forever, not just our religion, but all religion. Unitarianism may be the big U in our denomination with its visibility, power, and money, but Universalism has always been the U with a bigger heart. 10 syllables, and we're saying every one of them. Thank you.
Now we'll take 1 minute for meditation. Would anyone like to reflect on that? Yes.
So I'd like to thank Joyce for writing that and Bill for bringing it to us. I have to admit, I knew nothing about Universalism and very little about Unitarianism for that matter, except I really like the 7 principles. And I feel like what you have told us today inspires me to look a little deeper and see what's really behind our UU principles and fellowship and history. So thank you for opening my eyes to new information and appreciation. You know, when you have to say Unitarian Universalist, it's like a lot of syllables. And I always kind of wanted to drop the Universalists. Well, I'm thinking I want to go the other way now.
Anyone else?
I'm ashamed to say that I've dropped Universalist a number of times. You know, been part of community groups, including a faith group right now that is working with our church and many others on climate issues. And when they ask me, "Oh, which group are you with?" I usually just say Unitarian. And now I feel kind of bad about that. So I think from now on, I'm going to just use all 10 syllables and say Unitarian Universalist.
I feel the same way. Thank you. Diane?
Well, this is kind of a question of Ken and Katie and Cass and any other board members. Greg, they're here. I came prepared to do a 2-minute shtick on stewardship, on why I support this congregation. And I wasn't clear on whether it was today or not, but it fits so well with what Bill just presented. And before I came, I caught myself up on the service on the 17th, which Greg did, and I just feel like, you know, what I gotta say fits on the piggyback of both Greg's message of a few weeks ago and what Bill just did. Go for it. Okay, all right. Well, I need a couple of the children who are so good at collecting things to pass something out for me. And I'll come up here. So let's see. Would you make sure that like every 2 people gets one of these? I don't have enough. So I'm going to wait until those are passed. Oh, yes. Why don't you take half of what Sam has there and pass them to the people in the back? Could Mara help you? No? So what I'm passing out is a print of the mural that is up front in the sanctuary at First Unitarian Church in Albuquerque, where I was a member for about 10 years of my retirement. And I think I'll come up here so you don't have to turn your necks around. But, so why am I a Unitarian Universalist, and why would I support this congregation? Everybody got a picture? I came up through Methodism. You know, I was raised as a Methodist in a small rural town in Iowa, and my great-great Flynn grandparents were charter members in 1856 of the First Methodist congregation. However, when that great-great-grandfather died, he asked for a priest on his deathbed. And so in doing some genealogy, I noticed there's also a Universalist or 2 in the crowd. At a later time in my life, I converted temporarily to Catholicism and just got disenchanted and was, as Ken said a few weeks ago, I was a nun, N-O-N-E. And I retired from a career in the Cooperative Extension Service, and I retired from the University of Minnesota and moved to Albuquerque, thinking if it was a big mistake, I would just change my mind and do something different. But I really loved it and stayed for 10 or so years. I was looking for a church community, and the first place I checked out was First Unitarian in Albuquerque. And when I walked in to what was then that's the old sanctuary, there's a new one that's replaced it, there was this beautiful mural front and center. And it contains 5,000 small wood blocks that have never been sanded or painted. They were scavenged from the forests and the dilapidated buildings around Jemez, New Mexico, near the Jemez Pueblo. And the Alexander Gerard is the artist, and he incorporated at least 22 symbols of world faith schemes and religions. And they go back, to the first time that humankind began to contemplate anything other than their next meal. They began to contemplate the spiritual side of life. But I saw this mural, and I was brought to tears. And I just had the feeling like I've come home. And I still feel that way about Unitarian Universalism. One of the things I value most is that we create and protect an arena, a forum for discussing things like we discussed this morning, things like Ken discussed several weeks ago, the extraterrestrials, and the message that Greg gave a few weeks ago, and others and others. It's a place where we can talk about how we are inspired and guided by the world's great faith schemes, and we do not have to choose one over the other. And I would just caution us too to not think that if we embrace Buddhism, or if I take part in solstice ceremonies, that I am appropriating something that I shouldn't be appropriating. I think we need a lot more discussion on the terrific message that Greg delivered a few weeks ago. So I'm here, and I'm a pledging friend. I haven't yet made the decision to sign the book. It's probably coming, but I'm going to wait until my gut tells me that that's the right thing to do. And I particularly am interested in supporting any programming that we get going for youth in our congregation. Growing up Methodist, the youth group was absolutely a critical sort of insurance policy to my coming of age. Several younger couples in that congregation tag teamed and provided us kids a safe, enriching, exploratory space. And when we hit the wall with developmental difficulties, they were that third-party adult that is so needed during that time of life. So that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Bravo. Thank you, Diane. It felt like it came from the heart. Any other reflections? Can I tell you a joke? It's a universalism joke, I think. This person dies and goes to heaven, and St. Peter welcomes at the door, and St. Peter says, we've got lots of different places to go here. You can choose this room or that room or the other rooms. And so St. Peter gives this person a tour of heaven. And they go to one room and they look in, and there's all these monks on the floor. They're all praying. And there's an option. They could go there. They go to another room, and there's a bunch of Hindus, and they're doing their prayers right there. And they go on to another room, and there's some Baptists praying there. And finally they get to the part of heaven, and St. Peter says, now we have to be really, really quiet. And they have to tiptoe around like this. And they tiptoe down the hall, and they pass this room full of a lot of people. And after they pass it, and after they're done, that person whispers to St. Peter, and it says to St. Peter, why do we have to be quiet for those people? And St. Peter says, they think they're the only ones in heaven. Not everybody got that. They think they're the only ones in heaven here. No, I think heaven's big enough for everyone, just like the Universalists believed. Now we have another Unitarian hymn called Come Sing a Song With Me. This is a happy one. Page 346, please stand up. all together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Any announcements? Next week is Small Group Sunday, and we'll be talking about why we're Unitarians. Universalists. Unitarian Universalists. Good job. Okay. Any announcements at all? Pardon? Oh, the potluck is right after this. We'll go downstairs, and we have some great food down there.